All right, everybody. So, lords and ladies, boys and girls, we are here with the notorious SRB, Sarah Rees Brennan. She hasn't told me yet whether she's going to kill me for creating that moniker, but if you've read some of her books, I think you will be in a little bit on the joke. Pause that. There we go. Sorry. I'd made sure we were going live. I forgot I had audio on there, so that's off now. So, Sarah Rees Brennan, it has been a minute since I've seen you. I don't expect you to remember me, but I did meet you way, way back when you were in Omaha with Cassandra Clare and Holly Black. Like I said, that has been a minute. My kids, I think, were in high school and they were in their 20s now. But glad to have you on here. For anybody who maybe is meeting you for the first time, can you tell them a little bit about yourself?
Hello, everybody. I'm Sarah Rees Brennan. I will be referring to myself as the notorious Sarah Rees Brennan from now on because I love it. I used to write a ton of YA fantasy, at exactly the time that Edward's kids were there to read it. And now, conveniently, I have my first adult fantasy book come out. I've scheduled this pretty well, I think.
You did. I thoroughly enjoy this. I'm still learning to remember which shoulder to point over on where stuff is at. If anybody's looking a little confused, like you've got a bookshelf up there and it's only got like 2 books on it. I just got this put together a couple days ago and I thought it would be fun to add a book for each video. And obviously today had to be Long Live Evil. This, I think, you know what? Pause that. We're gonna get to that in a minute. Let's I've learned that a lot of people who watch these videos are actually aspiring writers. And I used to just do this. If you saw the Shauna McGuire one, it was basically just a book chat. And so I try to get some questions in there for some of the author people too. First and foremost, Sarah Rees Brennan, what is your villain origin story?
Ooh. Well, I love talking about my villain origin story. That is my speed. And may I also say, I was just admiring your bookcase because I was like, oh, yeah, I've got the book. How to put it behind me? No way. So, an inspiration. Also, I love the interview with Shauna and I love Shauna McGuire. I took a bit of a career break for time because I was ill and I was nervous to come back, but Shauna invited me to a horror convention. And in the morning when I was like, I'd wake up and I'd be like, oh no, what nobody wants to see me. Shannon would sing outside my hotel room and then I would come out. I could never return the favor because my voice is like a vulture who's late to the dead donkey. It's bad. My
I have
singing.
no problems with it.
My villain origin story is that when I was about 5 years old, I wanted to be a ballerina, like many a young lass or laddie who would watch Billy Elliot, and I was just very bad. So my mother came to a recital at which she saw me knock over all the other dancers, like on stage, like all of them. They were all flattened. I don't even know how I did it. And my mother later was like, it was like you were a bowling ball and they were all the pins. Now we have to go quickly because no one knows you're my daughter. Quickly, we have to go. And then I was like, I think I need a hobby whereby I don't get into contact with innocent people until it's too late.
Yes, it is.
Yeah,
I just pictured you spinning with your arms out like a top.
Exactly. That was exactly how it went. And I was a tall lassie even then, and it was very dark. Sorry to all those aspiring ballerinas. I hope some of you went on with it despite my evil ways. And then I went home and I started writing stories because I was always an avid reader. And I wrote about my interests at the time, which were ninjas and ponies, and finished my first book when I was 7 and just kept writing a book a year until one time in my 20s, I was like, I think this might be the one. Let me try it out. Let me try to get an agent. And it was the one. But that is something that I always do remember to tell aspiring writers. They're like, oh, well, you started out pretty young, so I guess you got your first book published. And I was like, no, it was about my 19th book. No matter how many trunk novels you have, I don't think it's worth giving up. In fact, I think it's much worse to have just one book that like you have your heart set on that you keep working on for. I've seen this happen year after year, and sometimes you're right, sometimes it is the one, but it doesn't do any harm to write another book because that makes your writing better. You can always go back to the trunk book. Just keep writing.
Nice. Actually, that's a nice segue. There was a question I was going to ask you maybe a little bit later, but you've already kind of opened up the door for it.
Wow.
I was going to ask you, as for the aspiring writers out there, I think one of the things that they maybe don't know how to do. So asking you, if you had to start over from scratch and you needed to find yourself an agent, how would you go about finding the agent?
Well, what I did was I would pick books I liked and I would go to the back of them and see them thank their agent, which you don't do if things have gone completely south. And then I'd be like, well, if they like this, if the agent like this and I like this, then we must have somewhat the same tastes. And so then I would Google them, and sometimes I would find their blog or find another writer talking about how they were fun to work with, or, sometimes maybe saying something that I was like, maybe not you. And then I made a list and I wrote to all of them. And it's about 12 people, I think. But also I'd had an agent hunt in my teens that went disastrously wrong. So, again, it is like keep querying, keep writing. This is a game where you get horrifically used to rejection. You're like, just think of it like book Tinder. You're like, oh, they swiped. Yes. It goes.
Which way am I swiping again? All right.
I don't remember either. It's so tragic. I'm like, I'm staying on book Tinder. I'm not going to the real one.
I've been married too long to have a Tinder account. Okay, so the other question I think I have almost every writer wants to know. If you could go back to your teen self, for instance, other than an agent, because we already answered that question, what advice would you give yourself to maybe smooth your path a little bit?
Oh, that is a really good question. But of course, I do think that is a dangerous question as well. I mean, obviously, what I would try to do is learn some lottery numbers and just go back with them and be like, here they are. This will smooth your path. Having a bunch of money will smooth anyone's path.
Fair enough.
But I do believe in the butterfly effect. I believe we change the story just by being in it. So I do think if I went back, even if I did it with the best of intentions, I probably would put my life in another course. For instance, I'd be like, how did I do that? Is magic or science? So I probably wouldn't go back out of terror that I'd come back and find out that I'm not a writer at all, because it was all I ever really wanted to be. And it's a tricky thing to become. It's a tricky thing to stay. So even though it's been in some ways a rocky road, I wouldn't go back and change it unless the lottery numbers. Then yes.
Well, yeah. Of course, I suppose then you wouldn't have to be a writer, but you probably a lot less stress, I think, would be involved if you did not have to do this for money and did not have to sell this book. It's like, I could write whatever I want. I don't care if you like it or not.
That's it. I mean, quite a lot of writers are independently wealthy, which has been, a thing to find out, but makes sense when you think about it. And some of them I have been like, maybe you would have more urgency if this was how you earned your living. But some of them, they're passionate about writing and they're using it the way I think any writer would like to use it, being like, I don't have to care at the market. Let me think about passion. Let me find my readers and find my voice. If something doesn't work, I can take a long break and assess. And so I believe some of the finest writers I know. And I'm like, well, I'm just glad for them. And I wish some other authors who I also love had the same freedom.
Nice. Now, I did read your actual acknowledgments in the back. I know not everybody likes to read the acknowledgments, or what's the other one that's real big right now? The prologue. Nobody wants to read the prologue. But touching on that fact, I think this ties together both as a writer question and as a about the book question. Obviously, you mentioned you were out and you've been very open about your illness. And Ray in Long Live Evil kind of starts out, she's got maybe not the exact same type, but she's got the same illness, for lack of a better word. How much of you is in Ray's, at least backstory, if not obviously everything that happened to her?
I first wanted to go back to the prologue thing because
Yeah.
I think prologues are like love triangles. People think they don't like them, but they just don't like bad ones.
Fair.
Like, think about Guy Gabriel Kay's Tigana, a prologue of all time. Like, you read that prologue and you spend the entirety of the book screaming about the prologue, being like, if only you guys knew what I knew from the prologue. And that's, of course, what prologue should do. That's what every piece of a book should do. It should echo to the rest of it. So I just wanted to speak for
No,
prologue.
that's fine.
To speak for acknowledgements also, yeah, my acknowledgements were very long, so thank you for reading them. Because, yeah, I got cancer and it did really change my life, but it is also something I wanted to be open about because I see people have it. I now mentor people with cancer, and you see people being like, well, my life's just over, especially like young people. And so some of Ray's me, and some of it is the people I've mentored who some specific examples of what happened to Ray is taken from other people, and I did check with them and changed for anonymity's sake. But like the experience of being left by a partner is not something that happened to me, but everyone who had cancer has lost people. And another thing I wanted to do is kind of, while I was sick, I've always been a people pleaser, and I was kind of trying to be a really great cancer patient, have everyone be like, oh, she's coping with it great. And then you just find out that you can't. You get very angry and very sad. And a lot of people in your life blame you for that. Like, I had some friends like years later be like, remember when you were like a huge bitch that one time? I was like, when I had cancer? Okay. And so while I was trying to be this better person, I actually did have someone in the back of my head being like, what if we just completely went nuts on this? What if we were as angry as we wanted to be? What if I was a different kind of person? Because I did learn to be more selfish and angry, but to have someone who kind of started out at boiling point, someone who was younger than me and thus found it even greater injustice, and someone who is also a leader and a planner, and I'm kind of chaotic, but thinking about someone who'll be like, all right, I not only have the anger to fuel it, but I have the kind of mind that makes an evil scheme. So in some ways she's like me, and in some ways she's crucially different from me, but in ways that I kind of wish that I had been, and other ways that I just thought would be fun. But every character has a bit of you. And actually there's one character in Long Live Blue who I think is much more like me than Ray, and no one has guessed who yet.
Oh, gotcha. Yeah, well, one of the things too, I think I had this conversation with Nat Cassidy about one of his characters one time, is I feel like a lot of times those of us who are not sick but are dealing with someone who's sick, we want you to make us comfortable, which I think is the complete wrong way to look at it. Because one of his characters was the fact that she was and I think he even said she was a bad disabled person, and he meant by the fact that she wasn't happy about it. She wanted to yell at the world, kind of have this frustration. And I don't think we, as the person who is not going through cancer or a disability or something like that, have any right to tell you how you're supposed to handle it or get upset because you don't make me feel okay about it.
I think that's
We've
true.
got to get used to
One thing
being.
I always say to my mentees is that the theory of the circle of pain, it works for grief, it works for actual pain. Like if you're in the center of it, and being a carer can be really hard. Being a friend or a partner of someone who's going through something is also really hard. But you have to put the pain outward. You find someone to talk to about that. It can't be the person who's in the center of it because they are going through the most. That said, I do shout out to all the carers there and all the people who stick by you because it is hard. And like with cancer, like for more than a year, my writing completely fell off a cliff. One of my friends, Holly Black, you mentioned, was like going over it with me and being like, sentence by sentence, this isn't making any sense. And I was like, I just can't see it. And it's very frustrating. One of my mentees, her marriage broke up because her husband was like, well, you've become very cold and not affectionate. And she was diagnosed at that point, but also there had been a year where neither of them knew what was going wrong in their marriage. And honestly, in some ways, being diagnosed with cancer was a relief because I was like, oh, that's what's wrong. Okay. Maybe I can get it back, get the writing back, get myself back to a degree. And so many people go for years with terrible health problems, mental health or emotional health or physical health, with no diagnosis, and that's terrible for them. So I don't know. It's all hard, and also, of course, everyone's dealing with their own personal stuff. So I don't
Mhm.
want to be hard on the people who, even though you feel that sometimes people are hard on you, because I think the only thing we can do in this crazy world is give each other grace. And when grace runs out, get revenge.
Yeah. Oh, I can see that. I can see that in your writing. Um, one of the things, one thing before we get into the book any deeper, I've got to yell at you for a second. This is not about the book. You know that we're coming to Ireland in a week or two. You did not once tell me. My wife sent me an article. We had no idea about this thing called spider season.
Ah, yeah, spider season. Yeah, spiders are our friends. You'll enjoy them. There are no snakes. St. Patrick got rid of them.
Yeah,
Gotta make a trade.
She just sent me this one about the fact that you should keep all your windows and doors closed because it's spider season. And we were like, wait, what? We did
Um,
not pack for spider season.
I forget. Have I told you to come to the Burren yet?
I can't remember. You did tell me about Ennisberry. That's added to our, I think I'm pronouncing that right, to our list. I've looked at a lot of places with a lot of names that are very similar. So forgive me if I say any of them wrong.
No, it's all good. I mispronounce words all the time because of being a very reedy child. Means that, yes. I
Yes.
once at a large event, like I was doing with a friend, there were a lot of people there. It was recorded, and I pronounced tropes, trope, like Saint Tropez, like
Well,
that is on the internet for all times.
hey, at least you're not Benedict Cumberbatch. Have you seen that?
Yeah.
He did a whole documentary, and nobody in the entire documentary told him that it's penguin, not penguin.
I mean,
It's
I have
about
to respect
penguins.
everyone who just committed to the bit. They were like, it's too late. We're going to let it go.
I'm picturing all these people going, "It's Benedict Cumberbatch. We can't tell him he's wrong."
I don't know.
But yeah,
I'd like to think they did it for the jokes because I like to do a lot of things for the jokes. But yeah, if you can, do see the Burn, because I remember seeing it as a child, and I was a huge fan, still am, of The Princess Bride. And I was like, oh, this is the Cliffs of Insanity. Mom, this is the Cliffs of Insanity. And she was like, you were the Cliffs of Insanity. What are you saying? But it was one of those moments where you feel that you have walked into a story, which I obviously love.
speaking of walked into a story, that's pretty much what this book is about. Um, one of the things, normally I don't bring up bad reviews, but I had to laugh at one today.
Oh dear.
No, because the person's problem with the book was twofold. One of them was like, she keeps using words that don't fit into a fantasy story. I'm like, did you skip chapter 1? She's a regular today human being that fell in. I mean, this is basically, I don't want to say that because it sounds condescending, but you can liken this to, was it a Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's court?
Yes,
That's
definitely.
the whole point, is that you're not going to use the words that are in your fantasy story. Nobody talks like a fantasy story in general, in everyday life, unless they're doing it for fun. And her other problem was the fact that she kept complaining about her, shall we say, endowments.
Yes.
And I'm like, you're literally making fun of how these books are written. It is almost a parody of romantasy, much like I think Color of Magic by Terry Pratchett was a parody of the fantasy tropes and stuff like that. I'm like, this poor lady, she gave you a 1 star, but she missed the point completely. I thoroughly,
Yeah, 1 star. Well, I don't read reviews. Though sometimes my friends send me, so I was like, I have not seen it, but I mean, I did anticipate some of that because, of course, the people love an epic fantasy, and someone comes in, talking in a modern way. And I also did want, because it's a world, Long Live Evil is about Diane Young who walks into her favorite fantasy world, but there's also people have walked in there before her. So I did want the language to have been already pulled slightly off kilter. Well, that's my what if we're thinking Watsonian and Doylistically, it's like, well, I also wanted to give myself a little margin for error.
Mhm.
But yeah, and she wakes up in her epic fantasy world. So, walks into A Song of Ice and Fire or The Sword and the Stone and immediately starts bringing it off kilter, but also wakes up as the villain of the tale. And that means, yeah, she's woken up in a villainous body. It's hourglassy.
Mhm.
And I was thinking about things like the movie Who Killed Roger Rabbit, Jessica
Oh, yeah.
Rabbit being like, I'm not bad, I'm just drawn that way.
Yep.
The idea
Vanities
that
in the
our
bedroom.
bodies can tell you anything about us.
Yeah.
But also it was about cancer because your body changes dramatically. One reason I wasn't diagnosed until like really late stage was that doctors kept being like, but you're thin now, which I wasn't before. And so you're healthy now. Good job. And I was like, I feel horrendous.
Yes.
And then frankly, let's talk about my boobs on the internet. They've always been a weather vane. So for a time I was like very thin, no boobs, and then it was very thin, boobs again, and then back to uh similar body type that I had before. And it was interesting to see how the world interacted with me at all of those points. And it did make me think about dramatic body changes. And it made me think about some of my friends who got boobs very young and had to deal with the way they would be like 12 and people would be interacting with them as if they were women. But also, yeah, fantasy.
Mhm.
And I love that you said Terry Pratchett because he is one of my favorite writers. And I love that he is always so funny, but in such an affectionate way. And yet with sincere love and sincere rage all bubbling under the surface of this. And how every time when I go back to Terry Pratchett, I find a joke that I'd missed the last time.
One of the things I loved about Terry Pratchett, not to get too far off subject, is just the map. If you've seen the maps in his books where it's just like a map and it's broken and it just says you can't map a sense of humor. I've always loved that.
I
That,
know.
that is
I
so
always did
Pratchett.
too. Although I will say I am a sucker for a fantasy map. I was really excited when they put a map in mine, and I gave a lot of thought to making something look like a real map, but also kind of look like a fantasy world map that isn't like quite filled in yet.
Mhm.
So that was fun. And whenever I open a fantasy book with a map, I'm always tracing it, being like, "Oh, we've been here, but we haven't been here. When will we go here?" So maybe I love maps more than Terry. Maybe Terry also loved a map and was making it a point.
No, no, no. And I get it both ways. I'm also a sucker for a good map. I love. I'm one of those people. It's like, okay, wait, they're traveling from here to here. There's mountains in the way. You get. I like to be able to picture that, and a good cartographer can really put that, at least for me, visually, instead of having to try to remember in my head where they said what was west of this or whatever. Of course, if you told my wife something was west of something, that would not help her whatsoever. She's like, take a left at the McDonald's. I don't know where west is. Um, but yeah. So the other thing, two things that came up off the point that you made, and again, obviously, I would not have shared a 1-star review with you if it was actually a bad. I mean, I was making fun of the fact that they didn't get it.
Oh, it's all good.
But you,
Every book doesn't work for every person, and especially a book which has a lot of humor in it, because humor is one of our most difficult and most subjective things, but it's also something
yeah.
I really want to do. I never believe in tragedy unless someone's made me laugh first.
But also feel like your humor too. It was still very rooted. For instance, the fact that like she can't walk very easily. It's like you got to remember just at the beginning of this book. These are not spoilers. This is like chapter 1, chapter 2 stuff. The very beginning of this book, she's dying in a hospital bed, can barely walk, and now all of a sudden she's basically inhabiting Jessica Rabbit's body in high heels.
Yep.
That is quite the adjustment to make in a paragraph or two.
It is. And to actually, you saying that makes me think about the quote about Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers. Like, I did everything Fred Astaire does, but backwards in high heels.
Yep.
And that, yeah, it is like a difficult thing to suddenly be in like this temptress body. But I wanted to talk about the body image issues at all. I wanted to talk the fantasy tropes of it all. And I wanted to say, in some ways, this is really fun. She's used to people looking at her for one reason, and now they look at her for another, and that feels great until it doesn't, until it does again. Like, life is complicated.
It
But
is one of the
I
things.
get uncomfortable with that, and that's okay too. Not
Well,
that
one
I
of
would.
the things I thought you did really, really well in this book is the fact that, again, we talked about it. You handled a very emotional, painful situation like cancer and managed to put it into this story where we get to talk about it and how people are treated and stuff like that. And in the next couple of chapters, we're laughing our butts off
Yeah.
because of what's going on. And I feel like you really need a lot of times we need that humor to be able to talk about emotional things and painful things. Uh, so I really appreciated it. I have lost a couple of family members to cancer, so I've never had to deal with it being on the sick end of it, but I've dealt with it in that there are people I know that we've lost from it. And I feel like a lot of people, especially anybody who's going through this may not be the book that is in the self-help section to how to deal with grief and stuff like that, but this is the type of book where you can sit there and it's like, okay, I'm going to cry for a moment and then I'm going to laugh for a moment, and at the end of the day everything's going to be good except for one thing. Until I got almost to the end of this, did not realize that this is going to be, I'm assuming, at least a duology.
It's interesting because I have people either saying, "Oh yeah, the book ended. It could be a standalone," or who being like, "Brutal cliffhanger," and there seems to be no in between. So I'm excited to be a polarizing figure, I suppose. And I wanted to cycle back and say, I'm very sorry that you've had cancer touch your life, because again, it's really hard for the people around you too. And I do feel like it's touched a lot of people's lives. And while I don't read my reviews, my friends kind of screenshot the 5 and 4 stars for me. And one review on Barnes and Noble I really loved was something that said, I read this, I laughed a lot. These are my favorite characters, but also my mother went through chemo and I went through every appointment with her. And now I think I understand how she feels. And now I feel closer to my mother. And I was like, well, that's what it's all about, isn't it? Being connected across time and space to other people, to strangers, but also to our loved ones. That's what book stories should be. So that made me very happy. I've lost the thread completely.
No. Just the fact that, like I said, I love the fact that we've gotten to go all over that. But my point was, and I'm guessing, and maybe this should be a question I put towards the end. It wasn't until I was almost done where I saw something where I actually finally saw some place that said this was book 1, because it doesn't say anywhere on the arc. So I'm
right. I think they have
assuming there's
put it
going to be a
on
book
the
2.
finished copy so that people will not come for us. Oh no, maybe not. Maybe on the American version.
I think
have
Goodreads is where I saw book 1 of.
Oh
I've
man.
forgotten the name of it.
Like, are they coming for me?
Time
Yeah.
of Iron or whatever it was called.
Oh dear. Yes, it's in fact going to be a trilogy, because I
Trilogy,
intended
okay.
it to be a duology, and then book 2 got awfully long, just very long. I am a chatty person, and they were like, "Okay, it can be a trilogy, but hand in book 2." And I was like, "I will. I'll make an ending for it, and I'll hand it in." So sorry.
Good, because I was like, I got to the end of it, and I'm like, wait a second. I have questions. Which is good though, because that brings people back for book 2.
Yeah, but it is to me also an ensemble story, because when you walk into a book, and if you have the character being like, "Oh, all the people around me aren't real people, they're just book characters," you might believe her if she's the only point of view. So I wanted it to have multiple points of view, and to almost immediately have the point of view of her maid, who she knows is going to have a very important sort of fantasy Lizzie Borden role in the future, but who is currently just a maid, being like, "Why are you being so weird?" And to have a somewhat Arthurian knight where he's speaking for the heroes in this villain book, but also because he's an inflexible person, I wanted the reader to be like, "Oh, we're watching him being like, is he going to be the true villain of this tale?" And having keying into those people let me, one, say the reader is going to view them as real people before the protagonist does, and be like, "Oh no, don't do this, don't do this." But oh, she's doing it. But also to say that it's a big, wide world with a lot of stories in it, and that we're going to be having more points of view in the sequels and expanding it outward and seeing the ripples of change.
Well, I think one of the things you did that was really, really well done too is the fact that all of your heroes are at least a little flawed,
Yes,
and all of your villains, none of them are completely flawed. They all have something that at least allows you to pick on to something that's like, okay, I like this about them. Not everybody's as good or as bad as the, again, tropical fantasy novels tend to make them.
yeah, I mean, I think that's just people, but I love a trope. I love subverting a trope. I love to pick them up and shake them like snow globes.
Hmm.
But one of my friends, C.S. Pacat, he was telling me about how he likes a really perfect version of a trope before it's subverted. And so thinking about like, what's the perfect version of a trope? What do I really love to see? What's satisfying? And what kind of person can embody that trope? And then how do you flip it? Is a really fun thing to me.
And I think you kind of did that because I feel like, again, the was it Time of Iron?
Yeah.
Yes. I feel like that book before she walked into it was all of the all of the heroes are pure, all of the villains are evil, and then she walks into it and basically shakes the snow globe,
Exactly.
and everybody kind of becomes not who she thought they were. Of course, it doesn't help that we learn early on that she wasn't paying as much attention to the book as she should.
Yeah. Some of my experience with audiobooks, they'll be running, and even if I'm really enjoying it, my mind will wander elsewhere. And I'm like, oh no. Whereas if I'm reading on a page, so her sister is reading to her, and her sister is a super fan. But I also was thinking of Time of Iron, the book that she walks into, as a tribute to the epic fantasies that I have loved. T.H. White, George R. R. Martin, Lord of J.R.R. Tolkien, and things like Wicked and The Princess Bride that complicate up that things. So I was thinking of it as an epic fantasy, but with like undertones. Because I was also like, I want this book to be popular. So she's talking about like there's internet discussions about this book. So there's a lot of subtext in the book that already happened. So I guess I had to plot out a book I wasn't going to write and just be like, what points of interest could like readers fight about online and be like, well, I think this. And other people are like, it's not that deep. We're just going there. And to have Ray and her sister have really different points of view and really different favorite characters. There's a phrase that I think is really interesting called a comfort character, which I think kind of speaks to people more than favorite characters. The idea of a character who reflects something that you perhaps see in yourself but don't express, or someone who does things that you wouldn't dare do, someone who's a bit like you'd want to be, but the consequences would be so terrible, or someone who just has the same sense of humor as you. And when we find those characters, we cling on to them. And Ray has one of those, and she meets him. And but Alice, her sister, has a completely different one, and Ray isn't that keen on him. We meet him too.
Mm-hmm. Now that kind of reminds me. I don't know if you've ever watched House with Hugh Laurie,
I have, yeah.
but my wife is a nurse, and she absolutely loves the character of House. But I looked at her one day and was like, if you actually had to deal with a doctor like that, you would hate him. And she's like, yeah, I would. But we get to have this outlet. I feel like you're saying too, is the fact that Ray, even though she goes into the story by becoming, it's on the back of the book. We all know she becomes the villain. But she gets to have that. She gets to do that stuff that she would never do on her own. Because she gets to embody this character, and everybody already expects her to be evil. So, hey, the pressure's off.
Exactly. You can just lean into your reputation. And I think I think we talk about social justice now, and I'm so glad that we do, because there's obviously a lot of stuff to be said about it. But also, I think, people end up in echo chambers, and we end up with very non-nuanced things, people being at extreme ends, and people feeling like if they do anything wrong, then they are, shameful forever. And it does make me think about the book Huckleberry Finn, where, according to the lights of his society, he shouldn't be helping a slave to escape. And then he just says, I'll go to hell then. It's a problematic book in a lot of ways. He then is horrible with his friend Tom Sawyer some more. But that moment where he does what any reader would recognize as the right thing, but who he fully believes the wrong thing, is a real clarion call to being like, you've got to make up your own mind about things and not care entirely what everyone else is going to say, because they may be wrong. They really might be.
Yeah. I mean, society changes their minds, every few years about stuff. So, I mean, can't always be on the right side.
And we're all going to make mistakes as well. And just being like, well, forgive it. Well, maybe it was a mistake, but I had some fun.
I do have a couple of inspiration questions for you.
Yeah.
One of these I think I already saw. For anybody who's watching this in the US, the book actually came out last month over in the UK. So I've seen you do a few interviews and stuff already on this, and I think you mentioned this once, but what was the inspiration for you to let's go ahead and make the protagonist the villain?
I think it's partly from the fact I've always been a little bit villain aligned. I read Interview with the Vampire when I was 9 and was instantly in sympathy with that monster. But then I had evil as a point of view on my wall, which was, I was a creepy child, yes. And then I read the sequel, The Vampire Lestat, which I was like, oh my God, that's the villain guy. Why are we reading a book about him? And then I loved him from the first page. And then I remember reading Song of Ice and Fire and hearing Jaime Lannister. First, he makes a speech to Catelyn Stark being like, so many vows, they make you swear and swear. And you're like, true, you are in a pickle. Actually, that king did kind of deserve to be murdered. I mean, kids don't deserve to be thrown out windows, Jaime, but you've made points. And then reading his point of view and being like, oh my God, they're giving him the Lestat de Lioncourt treatment. We're going to see his point of view, and we're going to end up really liking this guy. That's fascinating, because we know that these characters have done so much wrong, but seeing the writer give them a chance to be human is a way of saying everyone's human, and a way of like extending like radical empathy, but also being like, woo, you don't know what this guy's going to do. We are on a beautiful narrative roller coaster. So I was always excited by that. And The Princess Bride as well. Like, we now think of the dream team as the heroes who save Buttercup. But initially, Fezzik and Inigo are with the bad guys. They've kidnapped Buttercup. They do not have her best interest in mind. And like, if she had died on that, then they're just the villains of the story forever. So who is the villain? Who is the hero? Who decides it? Who decides where the story begins and where the story ends? Because in Long Live Evil, she holds it up. Ray goes in and she meets her favorite character, but it's kind of before he's in the middle of his origin story, so he's not quite her favorite character yet. And so it's like, when is someone irredeemable? Maybe never. So that's something I'd always think about when I'm reading the Narnia books. I always had a lot of time for Eustace and Edmund because they were the most interesting characters. They were making a ton of mistakes. And I watch a bunch of K-dramas, and they would talk. There were two Worlds and Extraordinary You, and they were talking about being a minor character in a fictional narrative, being the hero of a fictional narrative. And then I was just thinking about all of that and about sickness, and I was like, no, villain. And then one of my friends was like, oh, so you're writing an isekai. And I was like, what's that? And then she gave me a large reading list, and one that I particularly enjoyed was The Grandmaster's Guide to Demonic Cultivation, which is about a necromancer who gets to go back in his after dying and to see what happens, in his next life after being very soundly decided as a villain. And you get to see his choices through his eyes and be like, oh, I think you made all the right choices actually, but you're still notoriously a villain, and I can see why. So yeah, I think a combination of my misspent youth and adulthood, and also the fact that the tropes lead you that way. That it's like, what's the worst thing you could wake up as?
Now I kind of want to read a book where a necromancer is brought back by another necromancer, and
he's like, oh,
he gets to see the other side. The other character, since you brought up Game of Thrones, another character, and I was kind of wondering if you got your inspiration for the Cobra from Littlefinger. I feel like he was a lot of Littlefinger in him. I found it there. You know what I meant?
Not directly, actually. It's interesting you would say that because the Cobra, also known as the Wicked Marquis of Popenjoy, is a theater kid who's the spy master, playboy, former thief. And he's a really fun character to write. We never get his point of view, but we see him from the point of views of all three points of view, and they all have different takes on him. And he's an interesting, like, polarizing character because everyone's like, oh, he's notoriously wicked, he's a playboy. And I wanted also to, because Ray might made characters like, people are like, and you're the notorious harlot, and she's like, well, I really haven't had a chance to be a notorious harlot. I've spent a lot of time in hospital, but I didn't want to be like, oh no, she's actually secretly not a harlot, so it's wrong to treat her like that. So I wanted a character who's like, oh yeah, I'm getting around, I'm also like a kind person, but like in a thoughtless way. He is somewhat the more chaotic one, and so I think he's not like Littlefinger because I don't think he's particularly manipulative, and he also came from a lower place than Littlefinger. But I think that Littlefinger and Varys as well in Game of Thrones and many other such figures, spy masters, that we're primed to distrust them because you're like, well, they know all the secrets. What's made them want to know all the secrets? How have they built this network? What kind of person does that? And it's often, a person with a lot of trauma, and in the case of both Littlefinger and Varys, and a person who knows that knowledge is power. And we suspect people who want power. A lot of things, it's like, oh, the people who get power, the people who don't want it, they're the ones who deserve it. And then you're like, but it'd be very difficult to just have power accidentally fall on you. And also, if you want it, maybe you're more prepared for it. So I think ambition is something that's villainized a lot more than it needs to be. But I also really wanted a character who's really interested in narrative. So I made him a playwright so he could talk about what story means to him and creating story, so that he and Ray could have arguments about that.
Gotcha. Yeah, I think it was maybe the whole schemer / blackmailer / runs a brothel thing that just kind of drew me.
Well, some blackmailing. I mean, that's but I think that's part of him as a chaotic character. He's like, okay, well, in order to get this, to make this work, I'll just be doing this, and then this will work out. And everyone's like, blackmailing someone is not going to work out. And he's like, maybe it will. But then also having him be like someone who will blackmail and steal, but who really doesn't kill people, doesn't fight. And so there's another character who's an assassin from the gutters, and I always like that character, the one who's like, everyone's like, we've got a problem, and he's like, I've got a solution, and it's murder. And everyone's like, what if a different solution? He's like, then I don't have a solution. That's my one solution. And to have those two villain types have to be in a room together, because Ray's rounded up all the villains for their adventure, is fun, because I think we often don't have people talking like that. Like Jaime Lannister and Varys, we don't really see them having discussions because they both be like, what are you doing? That's not the way to handle stuff. And maybe they're both wrong.
One question I want to ask, and I'm going to avoid spoilers here. How fun was it to write a character, and I won't say who it was, but let's just, at some point, Ray realizes she's not the only one in the book that didn't used to be in the book. How fun was it to write somebody who got into the book and thought they knew how it was going to end, and then finds out that somebody else has read the book has changed based on what they did to the story, and now maybe they don't know how it ends anymore? I thought that opened a lot of interesting moral dilemmas.
It does, doesn't it? It also meant that I had the extremely dark moment where I realized I didn't just have to have one or two versions of the book plotted. I had to have like infinity versions. I had to be like, if it went differently once, it can go differently in so many mirrors. But then I always do like, that episode of Star Trek where everyone's evil and Spock has this little beard. The alternate universe version of yourself is always a fascinating idea. And also, I think sometimes people feel really insignificant. The other person, who I also will not name, but they think that they're a minor character. They don't think they can change the story. But I did want to say, you do matter to people, that you change the story just by being in it, that people love you or hate you or have an opinion about you, and that there is no way to be in the story without changing it, no matter what you think. And also, of course, it serves as a terrible warning to Ray, which she fully ignores.
She tends to do that until she can't.
Yes, that is her way.
But how much is that all of us?
Exactly. And like so much of the time we're thinking short term because you just, you want to get out of this problem. And then you're like, oh God, the dominoes have fallen in a way I never expected.
It's like the whole meme about the present me is very upset with the past me who made this decision.
Often when writing a book, I'm like, I don't know that that's quite right. Well, that's future Sarah's problem. She'll deal with it. And then later I'm like, oh, past Sarah. Who could have known this would happen? But yeah, no, it was really fun for me to think about the different things. And I do always love what if this had happened differently? The Buffy episode in which the vampires take over. The thought of like, there's a quote from a Softer World comic, I think, and it goes, who would you have been if that one thing had never happened? And I think that's always a fun question to ask yourself and be like, what's the big change in your life that made you who you are?
Yeah, not to get off your topic too, but since she's a friend of yours, for instance, Shauna McGuire just put out a book, a what if book for Marvel.
I know. What if Peter Parker was siblings with it's Gwen, right? I bought it, but
Wanda Maximoff, the Scarlet Witch.
She's better because, of course, we've seen Wanda have a brother, but we also know that Peter is such a good guy. But of course, that will also change Peter's priorities because he has an age mate.
Yep.
Like we've always seen him before with much older father and mother figures, well, his aunt and uncle, but that they are much older, and that's how he interacts with the world. And then you have Wanda, who's, irreverent, a bit more morally dubious than Peter. I just thought it was such a fascinating concept, and I love Marvel. It was really fun. I wrote a Scarlet Witch short story recently, and Gail Simone said she liked it, so I've been telling everyone that, and I will continue to tell everyone that. But yes, I think Shauna McGuire, she wrote the Wayward Children series, which is an amazing portal fantasy book series that did really inspire me, along with Alex Harris, The 10,000 Doors of January. I was like, I think we're doing something different with portal fantasy these days, different with the door to imagination. And so she has that kind of mind, which will be like, what if at every stage. So she was the perfect person to write the story.
But some of those are fun to enjoy. I mean, what is fan fiction if not how would I have written the story?
Exactly. I think we all start out writing fan fiction. I did. I put some on the internet, and Terry Pratchett wrote Jane Austen fan fiction, which is something that I love to hear. It is sadly lost to the mists of time, so I'll never get to read it. But I think that's how we learn to write. And also some writers still do it for fun, because going in someone else's playground and being like, well, what if it had happened a little differently is an urge that I think everyone gets, even if they're not readers, even if they're just watching a show, even if all they watch is reality TV, you're like, oh, I think he should have picked him. I think she should have won. Like, I think that-that's everyone. And like, even thinking about how Arthurian myth or Greek legend turns into Roman legend happens, that stories change, the storytellers change the story. And we all try to kind of jump in and be like, what if this?
Oh, yeah. I think that's natural. I mean, even if you look at people that don't write, I mean, what is fantasy football if not, what if I could run a team? That's all it really is.
Exactly. Or like the things where you decorate a house that isn't yours. You're like, what if I lived a different life? What if I was a different person? The way that often people are like, they're planning the life of the person that they've decided they'll be soon, but you mostly have to plan the life for you now.
Fair. It's what pays the bills. Oh, what else? I'm trying to avoid spoilers because there are a couple of questions I would love to ask you, but I can't.
Now I'm curious.
Let me ask you this one question though, because this is again not a spoiler. It's the beginning of the book. Ray obviously meets somebody who opens that door for her to get into the story, and we know that she's talked to other people as well. Do book 2, book 3? Do we ever get to know more about this mysterious woman, or does she stay mysterious?
No, I don't think you can put a mysterious figure who is that influential to the plot. I do love that. I think the stories that stick with people most are the ones with little liminal spaces, little secrets. But I don't think you can have someone open a door into imagination for the protagonist and then be like, and goodbye. You will get to see her again and learn her identity. There are a couple hints in book one. But she has her reasons for what she is doing, and they are well, she's not just trying to help anybody out. It's Ray and she discuss getting out of the story because Ray has promised a cure if she gets out, and she is like, how many people have made it out? And the woman says, maybe you'll be the first.
Yep.
So we're not
Good
meant
line,
to
by the way.
entirely trust this lady. She's got her own agenda, but she's fun.
Speaking of Princess Bride shout-outs, you're only saying that because nobody ever has.
You're like, so statistically. Exactly.
Yeah.
Have you read The Princess Bride, the novel?
I wish I had. I have not yet.
I only mention it because I think it's amazing. There's a conceit in it that isn't in the movie because I don't think it would translate that well to screen, but which I did have in mind while writing Long Live Evil. And another thing that I had in mind was the thing that is in the movie, which is like the idea that your loved one reads it to you, that it's a point of connection between you, that it's your favorite story, even though you haven't read it yourself. But also in the book, there is a pretense that it's a translation. And they're like, well, I translated it, but I cut out the boring bits. And they like have little footnotes being like, and here I cut out this bit because it's mostly about trees. And, that's maybe kind of reads like a little bit of a hit out of Tolkien being like, I was bored with that description of trees, so I cut it out. And at the end of the book, it says, if you want to read the full translated version, you can like write away to this address. And thousands of people have because they want more of the story. But of course, there is no more of the story to have. So I thought that was a really fascinating way to be interactive, but also like to discuss all things as adaptations. I think adaptations are really interesting because it's the story again, but changed to someone else's vision and through a different medium. Like Wicked the book and Wicked the musical are really different stories, but they interact with each other beautifully. And so I was thinking, of like all the different changed worlds that my characters have walked through, ending for now in Long Live Evil as like adaptations in a way, and also like drafts, because in The Lord of the Rings, Aragorn was initially called Trotter.
Mm-hmm.
And he was a hobbit with wooden legs, and I presume he was not the one true king, though maybe he was.
Yeah, I feel like maybe part of the reason I've tried to avoid reading Princess Bride so far is because so often a movie or a book will ruin the other one for you. Very few, like for instance, The Martian. I think The Martian was a great adaptation. The parts that they left out would have caused it to be like a 9-hour movie. So I don't have a problem with what they changed. But other ones, almost always the book is better. I still like The Bourne Identity better as a movie than a book, but that's just me. But yeah, so although I can, depending on where this goes, I don't see it as a movie. I could see if the right person got a hold of it, I could see Long Live Evil as like one of those like long mini, kind of like the ones we get now that's like 8 episode seasons. I could see Long Live Evil doing something like that. It's kind of got that.
I'd love to see it from your lips. It would be fun to me. And I think because I see the story as such a twisting, changing thing, I think I would be really comfortable with the thing in TV, which I think is once the actors come to the material, things change. We'll have different responses to different characters. And I would be just like, change it, go with that. Yeah. Because, that's the revolution of story. That's how it should be.
Well, 10 or 15 years ago, too, we would have had to have a different character play Ray versus. Now I always shorten it to Ray. Rahela, is that her name in the?
Rahela, yeah.
But I mean, after seeing what they did with Chris Evans for Captain America, the before and after, I feel like they could just CGI that, because she's not Ray very long in the book.
No, she's only Ray for a minute. I mean, I was like, I wanted to ground it and also to like provide a space for like people who maybe don't read that much fantasy to be like, oh, hey, we're here. And then I draw the one to my fantasy web. But I did want it to be like clear from the start, like most of the first book, even though she has most of the first chapter, even though she has cancer, is her arguing with her sister about this book series they both love in a way that I hoped that book readers would like empathize with, being like, I have those conversations with friends, and setting the tone of like what their diametrically different points of view. But I didn't want to linger too long on something that was sad, because again, I'm like, I think that if you mix sadness and fun, that both sides are more believable. So I was like, let's get her to the fantasy world and let's hit the ground running.
This is also one of those things that's I feel like my preconceptions of this book before I started reading it were definitely one thing that the book didn't end up being, but I loved it. So it was one of those things, like when I was pleasantly surprised. I thought it was going to be one thing, and then you got me into the book, and I'm like, wait, what? But for all the right reasons. Like I said, I know you're very well known for more of a YA tinge. This one, I feel like, the characters are young per se, but it's not. It's one of those YA and name only type books I talk about. I feel like it appeals to the younger people, but as somebody who's, let's face it, not in his 20s anymore, I thoroughly enjoyed it. I enjoyed all the curveballs you threw at us. I spent half the book going, how the heck is Ray going to get out of this?
And then, but yeah, I think I always like to throw a little surprise early on, because I think it makes readers trust you. Be like, oh, she surprised me successfully here, so maybe we're gonna have fun going on, and also make them guess, because I think no twist works unless some people have guessed it, because then you just didn't play fair. And it's like, oh, at the end you would never have guessed that a large fish was going to fall out of the sky and crush everyone. And you're like, well, of course not. That's a terrible thing, a way to end a book. So I wanted like breadcrumbs, and I wanted to set up people for like being like, perhaps we're on a twisty road here. But also, yeah, I do. It is my first book for adults, and I wasn't sure when I started writing it what it would be. But I think it's a pretty adult feeling, that feeling of like, you spend a lot of youth being like, I assume I'm the hero of the story. And like the small fears that you're not can be silenced. And then as you grow, and Leonard Cohen says that everyone's had the great disappointment of their lives. And I think that's true. As those things pile up, then you're like, if I'm a minor character, if I'm the villain, if it's not going to work out for me, what can I do? What action should I take? And what joy is there still to be found? Are all questions that you ask yourself a bit later. So that's why it was not a book to me.
And I think you did too a good job of setting certain things up with, for instance, the curveballs, because again, without getting into specifics, you obviously know what's going on when the book ends. I found myself getting towards the end and thinking to myself, Ray, shut up. Quit telling people this. You're going to throw everything off kilter. Gosh. And sure enough, it's like, hey, this isn't supposed to be happening. It's like, yeah, and it wouldn't have happened if you'd shut up.
She's bad at that. But yeah, also she's like, has no idea of what the other characters are doing. And in many cases, because which is the story, of course, about how all of us do that. You presume you know someone. Like at one point she's talking about Marius, the Arthurian knight, whose point of view we somewhat get, who's kind of like the child of Bluebeard and Miss Manners. And she's like, you can't explain nuance to him. He's not going to understand. And I'm like, well, he's a person. He can understand nuance. He's not particularly fond of it. But she's wrong about that. And so, like, when you are wrong enough, the mistakes pile up. And then, unfortunately, the narrative doom.
Well, I'm going to have to say the description of the child of Bluebeard and Miss Manners is now going to live rent-free in my head. I enjoy that one. All right. So we have been talking for close to an hour now. I try to be respectful of everybody's time. And I do have a few questions I'd like to follow up with. And I'm starting to get dangerously close to spoilers, which I don't want to do. Basically, everybody go get the book. Read the book. The book is excellent. I got to get the ARC, but I'm probably going to get a trophy copy to put on my shelf as well, which I don't do for an ARC unless I really love it.
Oh.
but I've also might want to have to reread it before book 2 comes. Also, I noticed like the arc is like 400 and some pages, and Goodreads says the book is 500 pages. So I don't know if you increase the font or if I'm missing something, but well, we'll have to find that out.
I
Probably not much.
Not sure. Also, there's a special edition that has some bonus content in it.
Yeah,
So
that's
maybe
probably what I'm missing. I wondered if
issue.
maybe there was like, again, the way book 1 ended. It's like, is she going to have one of those things where it's like, it's chapter 1 for book 2 or something? People like to sneak those in these days. But again, before I do any spoilers, let's get moved on here. I do have a few questions I always ask everybody. Let's start off with one. Is there any question that you were expecting, or just one that you wanted to answer that I didn't bring up?
No, I never. I don't think I try to not expect things because I feel if I have prepared answers, then I'll forget one, and
Mhm.
then I will just stare, be like fish-eyed, and be like, oh no.
Well, I like to ask because I've had at least one author that has told me, and I believe like Jim Butcher told me too. He's like, I never expect anything. But there's been some like when I started asking more writing questions because I came into this as a book nerd, just wanting to talk to authors about their book that I loved. I was like, okay, I need to add some of these other questions that other people might want to hear the answer to. But yeah, also the fact no is a perfectly acceptable answer. That is a no possible question.
No,
Uh,
all your
so
questions are great. I haven't found nothing wanting in this world.
perfect. 2, because everybody always wants to know what else to look at when they're all caught up with their favorite reader. Who is Sarah Rees Brennan reading right now?
Oh, well, I'm currently reading Laura Stevens's Our Infinite Fates,
Okay.
Kat Dunn's Hunger Stone, and Vanessa Vita Kelly's When the Tides Met the Moon. I think it's a longer title. And they're all fantasy. One is soulmates who meet, die in every life. That's Our Infinite Fates. Hungerstone is a version of Carmilla that's very gothic, even more gothic, I would say, than actual Carmilla. It really digs into some gothic deliciousness. And When the Tides Met the Moon is a historical fiction, but with mermaids, set in a really interesting time in America. I'm like, no spoilers. And they're all out next year. So I'm excited to get to read them early, and I'm really enjoying all of them.
Which brings me to another question that I didn't think about, but since you mentioned they're coming out next year, does book 2 even have a whisper of a drop down date?
We're hoping for next August, probably late next August, because I know that there's a good reason for the date being pushed back in America that I'm not allowed to say yet, but I'll get to say in a week or so, and I'm really excited about it. But I know that it is sometimes kind of tricky for people to be like, oh man, they have it. I want that thing. So I'm hoping the US and UK dates can be pulled together. So I think late August next year.
I like the fact that you said that because I'd originally, and I'd forgotten to ask it, I was going to ask you if there was a reason that it got pushed back to August, but we know that we don't know yet, but we will find out at some point.
Yeah.
All right. What skill, hobby, whatever do you have that you wish people would talk to you about occasionally? Because everybody always wants to talk about writing. Is there something else? A black belt in ninjutsu? You can write calligraphy on the head of a pen. Anything else that you want people to know about you?
I'm very bad at everything but writing, as bad as I am at ballet, but I do like making things. I made myself a silver ring and a goblet. The goblet is kind of shaky, but almost down. And I can fence extremely badly. A 9-year-old once beat me, like crushed me to powder, but I like to do it. I love swimming, and in Ireland, they do make you learn Irish, so I can speak Irish very badly. In your first day of a proper school in Ireland, if you can't ask to go to the bathroom in Irish, you don't get to go.
That does kind of make it a phrase you have to learn quickly. I will give it
Yes, I
that.
mean, this ends in tragedy every time, but like not to me. I'd like to make that clear. I learned fast under pressure. Would you guys? Would the audience like to hear how to say it so that you
Sure.
are not stuck? Okay. An will Dalamach Mashe da Halle. There. You can have that for your trip to Ireland. An important
I'm
question.
going to butcher that. We all know it now. I do want to say, though, that I think Sarah Rees Brennan is just ahead of her time, and that sometime in the near future, we will see full contact ballet as an Olympic sport.
That's so true. I've been ahead of my time in so many ways.
All right. One thing I didn't ask, I usually ask this at the beginning. I'll get this in now before I let you go. What is a day in the life of the Notorious SRB look like?
I don't think I have a typical day in the life. I love travel. I try to be in a different place a lot of the time. When I'm at home, I'm like often in my PJs with my cats. Like sometimes you're like in a glamorous outfit talking about writing to a crowd, and that is so fun. And then, but also then you're exhausted from it. So like I came home from my UK tour last week, and then the day before yesterday, I was like, I haven't done the washing up in a week. Oh no. I'm not really very good at staying to a strict schedule. So I like to write with friends. I like to go in cafes and write. I love to write when traveling. And I always tell myself that everyone on the plane or the train is like waiting for me to just finish. But once I was on a plane, shut up my laptop, and the woman beside me took my wrist and was like, I hope things work out for them. I was like, oh no, it's true. I made the story come true. I was like, I can write better than this. That was the first draft. Come back, lady.
Yeah. Don't go misery on me. That's all I have.
But I mean, hey, she was engaged with the narrative, so I'll take it as a compliment. Thank you, plane lady.
Exactly. I mean, hey, you dragged her in yeah.
I mean, misery, like most stories of horror, is a lot about what you fear and a lot about what you desire. I think a lot of the best stories are.
Are you some like to go back and forth? Are you working on anything besides book 2 right now?
I am. I'm writing a tie-in to Disney's Tangled.
I can see you doing that. I don't feel like it's going to be Disney-esque, though.
I mean, they may have to cut out some things. It's true. I have my ways.
It's going to be like the Deadpool 3, where they just make fun of Disney the entire time. It's a first for Disney.
I do love Deadpool. And Deadpool actually is a really good example of kind of what I was trying to do with Long of Evil, because Deadpool has a cancer thing, but you don't think about the cancer as much, but you're like, it's the grounding for his character. You're like, well, of course he has the cynical sense of humor because he's seen some stuff, but it's still a really fun superhero movie that you can go into with him. So yes, I'm glad you brought up Deadpool. I'm like, Lady Deadpool crashes into Game of Thrones. There's my pitch.
Well, there we go. I think somebody's going to go for that. I do appreciate how everything comes full circle. Have you seen? I can't remember if it was actually in the movie now or if it was just one of the trailers, where Fred Savage does his bit from Princess Bride talking to Deadpool in the bedroom.
It's not in the movie, is it?
I don't think it's in the movie. It might just be one of those.
I did.
It could be weird.
Right early, I was like, "This is all about it. I'm all about."
Yeah, he does this whole trailer where he's talking to Deadpool in the bedroom, like Deadpool's reading to him from the book, and he's like, "Well, if Big Deadpool is, growing new baby legs, is the bottom half of Deadpool growing a baby head?" And he goes off on this whole tangent. And Ryan Reynolds is just like, "What?"
It's like I was actually, I believe the if you chop a worm in half, they turn into two worms thing. For many years, I was reading Holly Black's Thief of Night, which is also not out yet, but which I also very much recommend. And in that book, she's like, "It's a lie," and I was like, "Oh God, is it?" Not that I've been doing it to any worms. But it's really interesting, the stories that we believe are true, and then you make them true, like Deadpool actually being the worm. And yes, I also did have that question.
Okay. You probably noticed, you probably already know this one, but for instance, like for years, to get rid of starfish, captains used to like pull them off their boat, cut them in half, and throw them back out into the sea, not realizing that now there's just going to be 2 starfish.
I mean, I'm glad it's not like a lie like the worms. I'm happy with
starfish will grow into multiple ones. It's
Maybe
weird.
That's where the worm thing comes from.
Could be. Who knows? Who knows where some of these stories start? It was probably something innocent. And it's kind of like the telephone game. By the time it gets to the 52nd person, who knows what was originally said? All right. So one more big question I got for everybody. I don't hate Amazon, but I do love my independent booksellers. Shout out to a local brick and mortar somewhere over there in Ireland that you love.
Well, actually, if I could, I would love to shout out to some American indies, because they did a pre-order campaign with me, which I really appreciated. So Murder by the Book in Texas, which I'm going to go visit soon. Parnassus Books, which I'm sadly not visiting this time, but I'd be excited to. Brookline Booksmith, which I'm also going to visit pretty soon. Book Moon in Massachusetts, also not visited, but again, would love to. And there's one more. Why don't I remember? It's not that I don't love you, it's just that the brain. Hang on. Okay. I almost got it.
Don't worry, I've had to Google stuff in the middle of a video myself before. It's like, what was that?
Mysterious Galaxy and Ballast Bookstore. I would like to say a big thank you to all of them, and many apologies for going blank.
Yeah. Mysterious Galaxy, is that in California, I think?
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, okay, yeah. So after a while, you get to hear some of the same names over and over again.
Mysterious Galaxy is an amazing bookshop. I've been there many times in the past and hope to go again. And there's some other indies that I've never been to before that I'm going to be visiting on my wee US tour in a couple weeks now, and I can't wait.
Nice. And I will give a shout out to the Bookworm who got to host. You were too big for them, so we had to host you at the middle school. But the Bookworm was the one. That's how I got to meet you. I was doing sales. I was working there at the time, and we were selling books out in front there at the Westside Middle School in Omaha when you and Holly and Cassandra came by. I almost called her Cassie. I don't think I know her well enough to call her Cassie. Cassandra came by.
I mean, Cassandra is the name of prophecy, the one who tells the stories that you're like, I think prophecy is a super interesting name. So I love that is her pen name to invoke Troy. So I'm also like, well, if Cassandra had said everything was going to go great, would people have believed her then?
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, the answer is no, because of the whole God's curse business. But it's an interesting thing to think about when you think about, say, Macbeth and all of these women telling the future. And then I bring myself back around to Lonely Books. That is one thing I did want to do. Have someone because that's what I do. If I walked into a story, I knew what would happen. I'd be like, I can tell the future. Listen to me. Everybody immediately listen. I would not keep it a secret. And I think that a lot of, especially women, but a lot of people who have been like, I know what's going to happen next, are like, people want to believe them, but they also fear that they're right. Like, think about the way people responded to Nate Silver. So, trust us, we're telling you stories is a thing that witches and writers and anyone who reads the tea leaves has in common.
I think a lot of times men just think women can foretell the future because they're telling us something they already told us before and we weren't paying any attention whatsoever. What's the running joke is like, nobody's more surprised than a husband whose wife is telling him something for the second time. Like, we're going where, when?
You got to tell the story a bunch of times until it comes out right.
There's a reason they preach repetition in elementary school. That's the only way it gets through these thick skulls of ours.
And I thank the Bookworm very much as well, because of them, I got to have this lovely interview with you.
Yeah, and I appreciate. I absolutely. Again, I'm not gushing. I wait to put out a review if I have the author on until after it. That way, nobody thinks I'm just giving a 5-star because I want you to come on or whatever. I did click the rating, but I haven't written the review yet. I did give this book 5 stars. For the people whose other reviews I've read, I think this one's got like almost a 4-star on Goodreads. I know you don't look at that, which is actually really, really good. Nobody gets a 5-star average on Goodreads. There's always a hater somewhere. It's going to bring the average down. But this book is almost all 4 and 5 stars on Goodreads.
Very kind. And yes, everybody who likes it, come and offset the 1 star for the boobs, please.
Like, the only reason I check out the 1 star,
no, I think they're for readers. That's what reviews are for.
And I had to laugh at that one. I'm like, lady, you've missed the point completely.
I mean, I feel like 1 and 2 star reviews are for readers because they won't be helpful to the writer because they just say this just isn't the book for me. Whereas I have read 3 stars and I do find them helpful because I had a 3-star review once. It was 1 sentence long and it was like, look, I love Sarah Rees Brennan. This wasn't her best. It wasn't for Long Live Evil. I want to bring that one out there real quick. But I read it and I was like, maybe they're right. How cool to know that someone expects me to do better. Let me try to do that. So 3 stars I think are still useful, but 1 and 2 are just being like, I wanted oranges. These are apples. Don't like them. And that's really good. It's useful for readers because if readers are like being like, is this an apple or an orange? Then they'll know. Thank you to everyone who writes any reviews, but especially
I hate the ones that are like 1 star, did not finish. Okay, you don't rate the book if you didn't finish it, or they're like didn't like it. That doesn't tell me anything. Although I feel like this lady would be the same person who would be like 1 star on Star Trek. It's like the aliens spoke English.
I mean, everyone comes to stories for what they like. There's this one website that rates Marvel movies based entirely on trains. They're just like, I love trains. So Thor 2 gets like the highest rating because Thor rides a train. Like, whatever you're here for, I hope you find the story that has it.
Let's face it, these days, whatever engages content, right? Somebody is going there to watch their train ratings.
I mean, you want trains, I hope you find train.
Oh my word. But so I don't have a link necessarily to the book. I actually probably will. I'll drop a link to the book when I actually do the video review of Long Live Evil. I do have a link down below for anybody who wants to check out Sarah's website. Just click on that, see all the books that she's got out. Can't wait for book 2. I'm going to have to wait for book 2, obviously, but I can't wait for book 2. That's all I'm saying. I do
have a little thing planned so that the wait won't be too difficult.
All right, and I can't wait to see here when you can say it. Like I said, I did actually have the question written down about why it got postponed here, but not in the UK. But you've already told me that we're going to have to wait a minute to find out. But at least I know I will find out, so that's a plus.
Yes, you'll find out in less than 2 weeks.
Less than 2 weeks. So right about the time I get back from Ireland. So that'll be perfect.
It's all planned. It's all falling into place. The story's going how it was meant to.
All right. Sarah, you've got my email. You even have my phone number if you ever need anything or if you ever want to come back on and announce anything. Doesn't even have to be a full interview. You have been a delight to have on.
You've been a delightful interviewer.
I appreciate that. I'm trying to get better. Luckily, I figured out my camera settings. If you'd been on a week ago, I would have been very dark. It was not good. Although, if we move this bookshelf, I think you and I almost have the same background. I think we got the same wall color going on there.
A wall color for intellectuals.
Could be just the lighting. I didn't want straight white behind me, and it's like, okay, we're good. All right. So didn't see any comments in. Like I said, sometimes people are quiet, so doesn't always necessarily mean anything. I have absolutely loved talking to you. We are going to hopefully get to back together, if not sooner. I would love to talk to you when book 2 comes out. Or if something else comes out besides this, because again, I know you said this is your first adult one, but it was spot on. 5 stars for me, thoroughly enjoyed. Once I got into it, I could not put it down. That's all I'm going to say. Enough gushing on my end. And I probably will not see you, but I'll wave as I'm going through Ireland. If you notice, see somebody waving, it was me.
I will wave back. I am in England next week doing a Heroes and Villains Bowl. I have bought a large metal crown of snakes, which has obviously led everyone who comes into my home to judge me.
We take off Thursday, so.
I think we are maybe meeting and I'll wave to you from a plane. If you see someone waving to you from a plane, it's me.
Although I did run into somebody once that I knew in the middle of the Denver airport, and I'm in Omaha. And we just happened to see each other in the airport. I was like, "Hey, how's it going?"
I hope fortune will bring you to me.
All right.
But if not, have the best time in Ireland.
All right. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you for all of the comments you gave me off in the email too about what to see while I'm in Ireland. Definitely made my list. And until next time, have a good one.
Until next time. Bye, everybody. Thanks for having me.